Good morning, everyone. Good morning. So I was going to continue with the Holy Land pilgrimage, but before that I wanted to talk a little bit about bishops. So, what's a bishop? What is a bishop? Huh? Overseer, yes. So the Greek word episkopos, which is where we get the word bishop, is just a very literal, practical word. It means overseer. Overseer. Okay? And sometimes when we get, sorry to say it, when we get Protestants translating the Bible, they'll just put the word overseer instead of the word bishop because they don't really like the word bishop. But you should know that in 1 Timothy, St. Paul talks very clearly about a bishop. He says, if a man desires the position of a bishop, he desires a good work. A bishop must then be blameless, temperate, sober-minded, of good behavior, hospitable, able to teach, not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not covetous, not a novice, lest being puffed up with pride he fall into the same condemnation as the devil. Moreover, he must have a good testimony among those who are outside, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. So that's what St. Paul says about a bishop, the qualifications of a bishop. But that doesn't really answer the question of what is a bishop. And the word itself is overseer. You kind of get a sense for it. So I wanted to read a little bit more about what a bishop is. First, this is from a wonderful catechetical book called Orthodox Faith, Worship, and Life by Hieronym Gregorios. And he says, first of all, he's describing ordination and when the ordination happens. So for the ordination for a deacon, it happens after communion, after the consecration of the gifts, For the ordination of a priest, it takes place before the consecration of the gifts. And for the ordination of a bishop, it's performed before the apostolic reading, because a bishop undertakes to teach the word of God and joins the ranks of the holy apostles. The bishop is the image of Christ within the church. He is the one who presides in the place of God. That's a direct quote from St. Ignatius of Antioch, and I'll read more of St. Ignatius in a moment. And the celebrant of the mystery of ordination through which the apostolic succession passes from generation to generation. Additionally, only a bishop can consecrate a church. So again, that quote, the one who presides in the place of God. This is a quote from St. Ignatius of Antioch. And now I'll read a longer description. This is from a book of Question and Answers by Father Stanley Heracus. And the question was, why is the bishop so important? He says, the office of the bishop begins from the apostolic times. Apostles set bishops over the churches which they established. Thus, in St. Paul's letter to Timothy, we read, and then he quotes from that passage we just read. There are several things which indicate why a bishop is so important. In English, the word bishop comes from the Greek word episkopos, which means overseer. The bishop is the overseer of the work of the church in any given place. One of the early fathers of the church put it this way: where the bishop is, there is the church. That's another quote from St. Ignatius of Antioch. The bishop embodies the apostolic faith, discipline, and sacramental existence of the church, in communion with all of the other bishops of the church. We know that we belong to the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church of Christ when we are in communion with and under the spiritual direction of a canonical bishop. I'm going to say that sentence again. We know, this is the way that we know that we are a part of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church of Christ when we're in communion with and under the spiritual direction of a canonical bishop. It doesn't say under the spiritual direction of a canonical priest. Notice that. All these dimensions of church life, faith, discipline, sacramental life, are guaranteed to us through the apostolic succession of the bishop, his membership in the synod of canonical bishops, and the fact that the bishop presides over the Eucharistic life of his diocese. In continuity with the rest of the church, from the very earliest times, each local church had its bishop, whose task it was to be God's steward over the life of his church. So the early church father was right. Without a bishop, there is no continuity with the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church of Christ. Any questions so far? Anything that piques your interest? Okay. So a bishop is, first of all, I'll just say briefly, there are three ranks of ordained clergy. There is the deacon, the priest, and the bishop. And the St. Ignatius of Antioch was the first to describe all of these. So St. Ignatius was a disciple of St. John the Evangelist. So he was in the very earliest church. He's called St. Ignatius the God-bearer because by church tradition, he was the child that was held by Christ. Remember the story of the Gospels of Christ holding a child and giving the child as an example to the adults? That was St. Ignatius. He eventually became the Bishop of Antioch, which was one of the largest cities in the Roman Empire. And eventually he went to his martyrdom in Rome in the year 107 under Trajan. So very early, this is right after the apostles. So anyone who would imagine that the conceptualization of having deacons and priests and bishops is somehow a later invention, all you have to do is read St. Ignatius. So I'll read a number of passages from him. Okay? This is in his letter to the Manganesians. Since therefore in the persons mentioned above I have by faith seen and loved the whole congregation, I have this advice. Be eager to do everything in godly harmony, the bishop presiding in the place of God, and the presbyters in the place of the council of the apostles, and the deacons who are especially dear to me, since they have been entrusted with the ministry of Jesus Christ, who before the ages was with the Father and appeared at the end of time. Let all therefore accept the same attitude as God and respect one another, and let no one regard his neighbor in merely human terms, but in Jesus Christ love one another always. And then again later in the letter he says this, Be eager therefore to be firmly grounded in the precepts of the Lord and the apostles, in order that in whatever you do, you may prosper physically and spiritually in faith and love, in the Son and the Father and the Spirit, in the beginning and at the end, together with your most distinguished bishop, and that beautifully woven spiritual crown, which is your council of presbyters, and the godly deacons. Be subject to the bishop and to one another, as Jesus Christ in the flesh was to the Father, and as the apostles were to Christ and to the Father, that there may be unity, both physical and spiritual. So he's describing this harmonious symphony between these three roles of the clergy. Now, in the early church, each of the cities had a bishop. And this is something that we've lost over time as the church has expanded. Bishops have been over larger regions. In the old countries, in Greece and Romania and Russia, a bishop might be over, maybe 50 square miles. But in the New World, in America, where there are very few Orthodox churches, our bishop, and his title is Metropolitan Gerasimos, because our diocese is called a metropolis. That's just a different administrative title. It's the same role as bishop. His region is all of the states that touch the Pacific Ocean, including Alaska and Hawaii, as well as Arizona and Nevada. So he travels a lot.
Doesn't he also have Washington?
Yeah, all the states that touch the Pacific Ocean, yeah.
I'm from North Idaho.
That's okay. They don't have oceans there. That's okay. So yes, Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, Arizona, Alaska, Hawaii. So a very large region. But in what he described here is he said that woven, the beautifully woven crown, which is the council of presbyters. Because in the early church there was a bishop, and then there were multiple priests presiding with the bishop, and then there were deacons as well. So now, because the church is so spread out, there's most times just one priest, many times no deacon, especially in the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese. And you might be lucky if there's another priest there as well. So what you'll see this Sunday is an image of the early church. Yeah.
So this Sunday, we're receiving the Metropolitan
Yeah.
and the Bishop.
Yes.
How do you discern, and also the question, is eminence in your grace?
Yeah. So, those
Yeah.
are very good practical questions, and I do want to get to those, but I'm going to save those towards the end, because that's very important for us to understand how to approach them. So, I want to read two more passages from St. Ignatius. The first is this. This is from his letter to the Ephesians. So, most all of his letters, he talks about the bishops. Thus, it is proper for you to run together in harmony with the mind of the bishop, as you are in fact doing. For your council of presbyters, which is worthy of its name and worthy of God, is attuned to the bishop as strings to a lyre. Therefore, in your unanimity and harmonious love, Jesus Christ is sung. Isn't that a beautiful image? You must join this chorus, every one of you, so that by being harmonious in unanimity and taking your pitch from God, you may sing in unison with one voice through Jesus Christ to the Father, in order that he may both hear you and on the basis of what you do well acknowledge that you are members of his Son. It is therefore advantageous for you to be in perfect unity in order that you may always have a share in God. That's the implication there. When we don't have unity, we don't have a share in God. For if I, in a short time, experienced such fellowship with your bishop, which was not merely human, but spiritual, how much more do I congratulate you who are united with him, as the church is with Jesus Christ, and as Jesus Christ is with the Father, so that all things may be harmonious in unity. Let no one be misled. If anyone is not within the sanctuary, he lacks the bread of God. For if the prayer of one or two has such power, how much more that of the bishop, together with the whole church? Therefore, whoever does not meet with the congregation thereby demonstrates his arrogance and has separated himself. Let us therefore be careful not to oppose the bishop in order that we may be obedient to God. So again, we see a very hierarchical approach, an approach of what we would describe, since many don't like the word hierarchy, of good order. Because everything needs good order. You look in the natural world, everything is ordered. It's only in our human relationships that there's disorder because of our ego and our fallenness. So the last passage I'm going to read is from his letter to the Smyrnians in Smyrna. Flee from divisions on the beginning of evils. You must all follow the bishop as Jesus Christ followed the Father, and follow the council of presbyters as you would the apostles. Respect the deacons as the commandment of God. Let no one do anything that has to do with the church without the bishop. Only that Eucharist which is under the authority of the bishop, or whomever he himself designates. That's why our current churches exist this way. Whoever he designates, I'll tell you about that in a moment, is to be considered valid. So it's only the Eucharist that is under the bishop or whom he designates that's valid. Wherever the bishop appears, there let the congregation be. Just as wherever Christ is, there is the Catholic Church. You see, he makes that analogy. It is not permissible either to baptize or to hold an agape meal without the bishop. But whatever he approves is also pleasing to God, in order that everything you do may be trustworthy and valid. So that's enough from St. Ignatius. He hammered home a point, right? I don't exist here in this parish except that the bishop has placed me here. The priest is not the head of the parish. The bishop is. But in this modern setting, we forget that. So at least we have the photographs on the wall to help us remember that. But that's what is ecclesiologically, as far as the church life is concerned, that's what is true and correct. And the proof of that is on the altar, under the gospel book. There's a cloth that I open up at every liturgy. And that cloth is upon which the gifts are consecrated. If you've ever noticed that white cloth that's on the altar, like when we do the great entrance, it's opened up. That's called the entomincium, and that has the signature of the hierarch on it. That's like the pass that allows all of the sacramental life in our church to exist. No antimitium, no church. So it's important that we understand this as we approach the visit of our hierarch, so that we can see what a profound role he has. He has the role of Christ within the church. The presbyters have the role of the apostles. Okay. So now that theological stuff, now the practical, okay? Because for many of you, it's maybe the first time you've ever been in front of a hierarch. So our bishop is Metropolitan Gerasimos. Do look at his photo in the South Fellowship Hall, since we'll have two bishops here. You'll need to distinguish which is which. He's the one in the center on the bottom. Okay? The other photo is Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew in Constantinople, and then Archbishop Elpidophoros in New York. So the one in the center is our hierarch, Metropolitan Gerasimos. A metropolitan is referred to by the title, Your Eminence. Or if we speak about him, I would say to you, Emmy, His Eminence is coming. And then she would understand that means Metropolitan Gerasimos. His Eminence is coming. So if we ever refer to him, if we're going up, we might ask for a blessing, we would say, Your Eminence. Or if we have a question for him, Your Eminence, would you like more water? Anything like that. For a bishop who has the title of bishop, which our chancellor does, Bishop Ioannis, he's referred to as Your Grace, or His Grace. We don't have a photograph of Bishop Ioannis. He's fairly recently elevated to the role of bishop. He's our chancellor, so sort of like the one managing the office of the whole metropolis. So he works a lot with situations where parishes have struggles, or where a priest is moved from one parish to another, and things like that. That's the chancellor's role. So he will be coming as well. Again, we refer to him as Your Grace, and to our hierarch as Your Eminence. Does that make sense? Questions?
So is Your Eminence higher in?
Yes. So all deacons are exactly the same, ecclesiologically speaking. All priests are exactly the same. All bishops are exactly the same. If there's an ecumenical council, all bishops should go. There are titles of different kinds of bishops, and that has to do with an administrative role. So generally, like something like a metropolitan would be over a larger region. And a patriarch, which is just a bishop, ecclesiologically speaking, it's just a bishop. A patriarch would be over a larger region. And there are other titles like archbishop also is used. We have an archbishop as well. And some of those titles, in different jurisdictions, they use them differently.
Yeah.
But they're all bishops, yeah. They're all bishops. So in the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, if someone is called a bishop, their name is bishop whoever. They're usually like an auxiliary bishop. So they're filling in some sort of administrative role within the archdiocese. They don't actually have parishes that are under their shepherding. If they have the title of metropolitan, then they have parishes that they're shepherding. So, good question. Any other questions?
What's the obedience between, let's say, the metropolitan and the bishop?
So the bishop would be obedient to the metropolitan. Yeah. And he would also be obedient to the Synod of America, the Synod of the Metropolitans in America. They meet together at least twice a year. And so he would also be obedient to that Synod.
How do you ask for blessing with?
Excellent question. So for those of you who are accustomed to asking a priest for a blessing, the way that would be is we place our hands out like this. You can say a blessing, may I have a blessing, like that. If you're not accustomed to asking a priest for a blessing, please get accustomed to it. It's a good blessing. Okay? For a bishop, typically what we'll do is we'll touch the ground and then put our hands out. And if you want to say master blessing or just say nothing, if you have your hands out like this, he knows what that means. Now, Metropolitan Gerasimos, he is up in the years and he is cautious about health. So what he may do, come up here, Caleb, I'll give you an example. Okay? So pretend I'm the bishop and ask for a blessing. Okay? He may do this, like that. Okay? Which means he's giving a blessing, but he doesn't need you to venerate his hand. But always, please strive to. You know, like when he comes forward, you go to venerate his hand. He may be so quick because he's just a little concerned about germs. So, thank you. Okay, or he might pat you on the head. With kids, he'll do that, pat them on the head. So, both of the hierarchs that we'll be visiting, both of them are incredibly friendly, generous, kind people. So even they'll be in black robes, they'll be foreign to you, know that they both have warm hearts. It's not always the case, but we're very blessed. You're still obedient no matter what their personality is. Catherine, and then back to Rebecca.
I was in Arizona in the Metropolitans, and everybody come here, and he took a selfie of him and all the kids.
Oh yeah, he loves the kids. He loves the kids. That's why we're giving him the gift of the photo. Yeah.
So, like in our archdiocese, well, the archdiocese I was in,
You were in
I'm not
the
in-
Antiochian Archdiocese.
Antiochian.
Yeah.
whoever had the highest obedience, I guess you call it, that was the only one you're allowed to ask for a blessing. So like if Metropolitan Joseph was there and my priest was there, I could not ask my priest
You
for a
would
blessing. I
not,
could only
correct.
ask-
Yeah, I will not be
Metropolitan
giving
Joseph.
blessings, so don't even try.
But since there's two bishops, then you only ask His Eminence.
No, either is fine.
Either is fine?
Go to His Eminence first.
Is
But there might be a situation where they're in separate places, and you go up to Bishop Ioannis. Bishop John, you can say that too. Ioannis is the Greek name for John. There was something else I was going to say, I don't remember. But yeah, I won't be giving a blessing. Why? Because my blessing is actually from the bishop. You never realized that. The blessing I give is from the bishop. If the bishop's here, he'll give the blessing. Just a brief background for those of you who don't know anything about our hierarchs. Metropolitan Gerasimos has been our hierarch since 2005. Before that was Metropolitan Anthony of blessed memory. Metropolitan Gerasimos, he was born in Kefalonia in Greece, but then he went to Hellenic College as an undergraduate. He stayed in America ever since. I think it was like in the 60s, probably. He eventually became the dean of students there, and many people knew him there. He was the archdeacon, which means the deacon for the archbishop. So he would travel with Archbishop Iacobos all around. And he was at the seminary for many years. Many people know him as Deacon Jerry. So Gerasimos, a nickname is Jerry. And then he's been here with us since 2005. We're coming up on 20 years of having him. He was a long-time marathon runner, ran the Boston Marathon many years. So he's very lean. He's always had a wiry frame. Bishop Ioannis was a parish priest. He was born in Virginia. He's American-born. And you'll notice that his haircut, which is completely buzz, is a military haircut. Even before he lost some of his hair, he always had a buzzed haircut because he was a chaplain for many years in the Navy. And he was a celibate priest. I don't know if you remember this, but priests have the choice to be married or not before their ordination. Once they're ordained, they remain in the state that they're ordained. So he chose to be ordained as a celibate priest. And he served in parishes, he served in the Navy. Last, he was down in Downey, California, in Southern California, for many years as a priest there. And then just about a year ago, he was elevated to the episcopacy. So he became Bishop Ioannis, or Bishop John. Okay. Question, Gabriel?
On the topic of blessings,
Yes.
who would normally, if the bishop's here, who would pass out the Aviva at the end of the service? Because that's
We'll see.
Okay. If it's you,
We'll
do
see.
you not kiss your hand when you're handing out the bread?
It's fine either way. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we are getting a blessing if you're doing the Aviva, but not the
Yeah.
rest of them.
He probably will, either him or Bishop Ioannis, but it's possible that he might have the clergy do that.
That makes it a lot easier to kiss his hand, should we?
There we go. Another question.
When they have a celibate priest, they have a priest monk, so a priest monk would be attached to a monastery, and just a celibate priest is just a priest without being.
Yeah, so question about a celibate priest versus priest monk. That's a jurisdictional difference as well. I know that in the Russian tradition, anyone who's a celibate priest is referred to as a priest monk. Even if they're not particularly or they're very loosely attached to a monastery, they're just serving in parishes. Typically in our archdiocese, they're just a priest, and eventually they might receive a title of honor, which is called an archimandrite. And so he was, Bishop John, before becoming a bishop, was an archimandrite. But yes, in our jurisdiction, priest monk means actually a priest at a monastery. He may leave the monastery briefly, but he's strongly attached to a monastery.
Okay,
So.
I met our man right from Mount Athos in here,
Uh,
so he's.
oh, he's from Mount Athos, he's attached to a monastery. Yeah, can't be there unless you're attached to a monastery.
Both states would be an argument, right?
Yeah, because that's a title. It's a particular title. So there are other titles like for priests of proto-presbyter, ikonomos, pneumatikos. These are different titles for presbyters. Just like there's metropolitan versus archbishop versus patriarch. Those are different titles. So that's a title for a celibate priest. Yeah.
I think the question is this portion of the scripture, I think it's in the Gospel of John, where Jesus reads upon the apostles and he says, "He who sins you forgive." I also
Yes.
say, "He who sins you retain, I also retain."
Yeah.
And bishops are successors of the apostles. Is it correct then that the ability for you to hear our confessions, for example,
All sacraments.
yes, it is transferred from bishop
Correct.
to you? And is there some part of your testament that shows that that's been authorized? I think
Not that I'm-
that's a question.
Oh, as far as the permission to hear confessions, yes, the diamond shape.
Yeah.
It goes down at the knees. But yes, that means that, in the language of our archdiocese, the title is pneumatikos, spiritual father. So anyone who has that has been given the permission by the bishop to hear confessions. All of the sacraments have their origin with the bishops.
So the term hieromonk, which jurisdiction is that?
Hieromonk is priest monk. It's the same
It's
thing.
priest monk, but
Generally, in our jurisdiction, that means a monastic. In other jurisdictions, sometimes that just means a celibate priest.
Oh, okay, so
Yeah.
same thing.
Yeah. And this will be the last question because I want to get to this as well.
I would assume that celibate priests, unlike monks, don't make the vows of not eating meat for the rest of their.
Yeah, I'm not aware that is the case. That is a monastic practice. Okay, thank you, everyone. Look forward to receiving him again. Come at least 10 minutes early to Vespers, and then for liturgy, come to Orthros if you're able to. Okay, so we'll continue with this while time allows. So what I wanted to do, these are the slides we did before. Move down a little bit. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about, so this is an overview of everything I'll be talking about. We just did number 1 last week. I don't know that we'll go through all of these week by week by week. It'll probably be quite a bit longer. Things like Jesus' ministry. There are many sites in the Holy Land that relate to that. Aspects of his birth as well, and certainly his death and resurrection. So the next thing that we'll be talking about, I decided to talk about the pilgrimage instead of telling you, well, on day 1 I went here, day 2 I went there, day 3 I went there. I wanted to bring them all together with the life of Christ. So what I'm talking about instead is I'll be going through the life of Christ. And the life of Christ begins with Panagia's birth, right? The liturgical year begins with Panagia's birth, and it ends with her dormition. So we'll start with that. And that's what I'll be talking about today, which is the birth of the Theotokos. And I have a number of books to read from today, including a children's book. There's much that we know about Panagia and about her parents that the rest of Christianity has lost or forgotten. If you ask a Roman Catholic, who are the parents of Mary, they'll say, oh, that's been lost in history. We don't know. In every service, we say, the ancestors of God, Joachim and Anna, every single service. So a very different understanding within Orthodoxy. Oh, sorry. Okay, so these are 2 icons. I'll show a number of icons. These are all from the trip. So this icon on the left was an icon that was at St. George Oziva Monastery, which I'll talk about in a moment. And the icon on the right, which is a very old icon, that was from the home of Saints Joachim and Anna, which is one of the sites in the Old City. Okay, so first, this is from The Life of the Virgin by St. Maximus the Confessor. It's in the bookstore, you can read it there. And I'll read a little bit about her parents. Joachim was from the tribe of David, the king and prophet, and his spouse was Anna. And he was childless until old age because his wife was barren. Nevertheless, according to the law of Moses, an honor was afforded to women who gave birth that was not given to childless. So there's an honor given to women who had birth that childless mothers would not receive. Now then, Joachim and Anna were esteemed and honored in deed and word, because they were known to be from the lineage of Judah and David and the succession of kings. And ultimately the tribes of Judah and Levi were united, that is to say, the royal and the priestly tribes were mixed. For so it is written concerning Joachim and Joseph, to whom the Holy Virgin was betrothed. Although he was called from the house and tribe of David according to the nearer side, see Luke chapter 1, verse 25, both sides nevertheless became one, the one by nature, which was from David, and the other through the law, which was the Levites. So the blessed Anna was also an obedient branch from this tribe, and she foretold that the king born from their child would be a high priest, as God and human being. But on account of the law of Moses and the reproach of senseless people, childlessness greatly distressed the honorable and glorious parents of the Virgin when they were wanting a child to be born from them, to eliminate not only their own reproach, but that of the whole world, and to lead up to higher glory. Then the blessed Anna, like the first Hannah, or Anna, the mother of Samuel, went to the temple, and she prayed to the Creator of all things to give her the fruit of childbirth, so that she would dedicate to him as a gift what had been given to him. So also the worthy Joachim was not negligent, but he asked God to loose the bonds of childlessness. So that's a little bit about them, and then I'll read, this is from the life of the Virgin Mary, which is another book we have as well.
Father, quickly, something might not know when St. Maximus lived. So this is very close.
This St. Maximus was he was in the 7th century.
Yeah.
7th century. So an ancient writer, and not the only one that wrote about the life of the Theotokos as well. But this is one that we have in English, so that's all we can deal with for now. So this is from the life of the Virgin Mary, the Theotokos. And it says, now the great day of the Lord was at hand, the feast of the dedication, Hanukkah, and the feast of lights, commencing on the 25th, which was celebrated for 8 days, when the sons of Israel would bring their offerings. At this time, Joachim too was preparing his gifts to offer to the Lord. When the high priest Reuben beheld Joachim, he despised him and spurned his gifts, saying, it is not lawful for you to stand among those who are offering sacrifice to God, because God has not blessed you, so as to give you seed in Israel. Cursed is everyone who has not begot a male or female in Israel. Thus a hymn for this feast day says, the holy Joachim and Anna brought their gift to the sanctuary, but it was not received on account of their childlessness. Reuben then said to Joachim that Joachim ought first to be freed from this curse by having a child, and then only should he come into the presence of the Lord in the temple with his offerings. A Kontakion of St. Romanos speaks of the holy man's rejection. It says, quote, he brought gifts to the temple, but they were not received. The priests did not wish to accept them, since they were from a childless man who had no seed. And Joachim was scorned by the sons of Israel. But at the proper time, along with Anna, he brought in the virgin with gifts of thanksgiving. Publicly disdained for childlessness, the confounded Joachim, covered with shame from his reproach that was thrown in his teeth, retreated weeping from the court in the temple of the Lord. Exceedingly grieved, he went away to the registers, and he looked to see if there was anyone in the registers of the tribes of Israel who had not made seed in Israel. And he searched only to find that all the righteous had raised up children in Israel. Saddened by this, he nevertheless comforted himself when he called to mind the patriarch Abraham, whom God gave a son in his latter days. And there's a wonderful children's book. I have to tell you that they're getting it in a week. They're out of it right now, but we have this copy at home. If you want your children to learn more about their life. So this is an image of the two of them, Joachim and Anna, being in reproach by these mothers who have children. And this is from the Kondakion of the Feast of the Nativity of the Theotokos. O Immaculate One, by your holy nativity, Joachim and Anna were set free from the reproach of childlessness, and Adam and Eve from the corruption of death, delivered from the guilt of offense, as your people celebrate as they cry to you. The barren woman bears the Mother of God, the sustainer of our souls. Any questions so far about all of this narrative? Do you wonder where this comes from? There's a book called the Proto-Evangelion of James, and this is what's in the category of apocryphal literature. It was written sometime in the early 2nd century. But the church, in her wisdom, doesn't just say, here's the Gospels, here's the epistles, everything else is wrong. The church pulls things in. They're not in the Bible per se, but they're holy books. And there are many of these, like the epistle that I read from Ignatius. These are considered equivalents in weight and in force to the writings of St. Paul. So there are a lot of books like this that are included within the life of the church. And one of these is the Proto-Evangelion of James, which we don't read in the church, but the first 5 chapters describe the life of the Theotokos. So that's where these come from.
So that's James, the brother of Christ?
Yes. Yeah, it's attributed to James, the brother of the Lord. Yeah.
That title, Proto-Evangelion, is the Proto-Gospel.
Yeah, like before, the gospel before the gospel. Because it's telling before Christ's life, his earthly life. So at that time, Joachim was not inclined to return home. So he's at the temple, he's been rejected with the gifts, he didn't go home. Lest his neighbors and those of his tribe who were present and heard the rebuke of the high priest should publicly reproach and brand him in the same manner. Therefore, not returning to his house, Joachim went to his shepherds and flocks, and took them to a far place into the mountains. There in the hill country Joachim retired, saying, I will not go down either for food or drink until the Lord my God shall look upon me. Prayer shall be my food and drink. And again, St. Romanos in one of his hymns chants, Joachim on the mountain prayed to receive fruit from the womb of Anna, and the prayer of the holy man was accepted. So where did he go to pray? At this monastery. It wasn't a monastery, of course. So this monastery, one of the ancient monasteries in the Holy Land, this is in what's called a wadi, which is a dry valley that sometimes has water. In the case of this one, the water flows year-round. You see how there are trees. It's kind of hard with the coloring to see. Those are all trees, the darkness there. And that's all of the structure of the monastery there. But the original monastery was just caves. All of these cliff sides are pocked with little caves. And in one of those caves is the tradition that Joachim went and prayed. So we went to this monastery. To get there, you have to go down this steep trail. And there are these Bedouins that have donkeys, and they offer to give people rides if you pay them. They're very aggressive in their sales pitch. One of them picked up Thomas and put him on the donkey, and he went all the way up the hill. Thomas was like, what? And then what did he ask for at the end of the ride? So that's Peter and Nicholas there writing. So this is the monastery. And this gives you a sense of how steep the sides of the cliffs are. That's the monastery built up. It's built out of actual caves. The original caves that eventually became the monastery church, then they built up around that. And down below, that's where the spring runs year-round. And only Orthodox are permitted inside this monastery. So that's where Joachim went to pray. And this is an icon that's at the monastery there, in praying in the desert. Okay, you can read that for a moment. This is from the Proto-Evangelion of James. That's what I just read. Okay. Yes. Very monastic thing he did, yes, yeah. So he went for 40 days into the desert. It's very biblical. There's much example of that within the Bible, and we follow that same example, just like Elijah went 40 days in the desert as well. So, Jesus, of course, yes.
Father,
Yes.
again, maybe for some guys to wrap your mind around, James very easily lived during the time of the, so he wasn't hearing about it. He lived, he was a contemporary with him.
So you have to understand, and this is something that we moderns forget, when virtually everyone is illiterate, the spoken word is very important. You don't just go and make up stories about things. People hand down the entire history of their family verbally to their children, and then they hand it on from there. It's something that we very much lost. We have like a little shadow of that with our own family trees. But it is not at all surprising that all of this was kept in the oral tradition. Not at all surprising, yes.
Or just the Bible reflects it when St. Paul says to keep those traditions I handed on to you by word of mouth.
Yeah.
Or by epistle. He says it correctly.
And St. Paul also quotes Christ as saying, quote, "It is better to give than to receive," in his epistles. And then you go, wait a second, that's not in the Gospels at all. Where did he get that? Because, of course, they were passing down far more than what was written in the Gospels. Far more. Christianity is a way of life, not an adherence to a book. So I'll continue forward. Anna, meanwhile, departed the court of women in the temple, and she went home weeping bitterly. Indeed, Anna mourned doubly, saying, "I shall bewail my widowhood, I shall bewail my childlessness." So she thinks that she's lost her husband because of this great offense that occurred towards him, and he went off in the wilderness. Now the great day of the Lord was at hand, and Anna put off her garment of mourning. At about the 9th hour she went down to the garden to walk. She saw a laurel tree and sat under it and prayed to the Lord, saying, "O God of our fathers, bless me and hear my prayer, as you opened the womb of Sarah and gave her a son Isaac." On this occasion, St. Romanos chants, "The prayer and the groaning of Joachim and Anna at their barrenness and childlessness have proved acceptable and have come into the ears of the Lord, and they have put forth a fruit that brings life into the world. The one offered his prayer in the mountain, the other bore her reproach in the garden, but with joy the barren woman bears the Theotokos who sustains our life." When Joachim had been in the mountains for some time, on a certain day, when he was alone, the archangel Gabriel stood by him. Joachim was disturbed at his appearance, but the angel endeavored to restrain his fear, saying, "Fear not, Joachim, nor be disturbed by my appearance. I am the angel of the Lord and have been sent by him to tell you that your prayers have been heard and that your charitable deeds have gone up into his presence. God has seen your shame and has heard the reproach of unfruitfulness which has been unjustly brought against you. While the holy Anna was in the garden, behold, the same angel of the Lord then appeared to her, saying, "Anna, Anna, the Lord has heard your prayer, and you will conceive and bring forth, and your seed shall be spoken of in all the world." And Anna said, "As the Lord my God lives, if I beget either male or female, I will bring it as a gift to the Lord my God, and it shall minister unto him all the days of its life." The wise Anna prayed faithfully, and God hearkened, and she heard the angel's confirmation from her many entreaties. And I'll stop there for that portion. So their prayers were heard as they were praying in two separate places. They were praying in the garden, and at the garden near their house, which would be the Garden of Gethsemane, which is right near their home, and then him in the wilderness. So then they came back together. This is another beautiful icon. This one, I believe, is at the Dormition of at their tombs. And we see here the angel visiting Joachim up in the desert, in the mountains, and the angel visiting her in the gardens. And then they come together. This is a famous icon of Joachim and Anna that oftentimes people give at weddings, is the two of them coming together. And this is from the canon of the Orthros. He who supports all things with his word and his mercy has hearkened unto the prayer of righteous Joachim and Anna. He has loosed them from the anguish of barrenness and given them her who is the cause of our joy. Any questions?
Just want to make sure I don't misunderstand this. Anna thought she lost Joachim because she didn't know he was going to be gone 40 days.
Yeah, he went to the temple to make an offering. She was also there at the temple, and then he left. And then he went straight into the desert.
So we just had a marriage retreat on communication.
Because did you hear what he was thinking? What he was thinking is, if I go back to my house, then all those people who were in the temple and saw that, they would brand us. So there would be more reproach that fell upon Anna. So he left to lessen that reproach. Yeah. Good question, yeah. Okay. So, question back there, yes. 5 minutes, okay.
It seemed kind of harsh that he was rejected.
Mm-hmm.
Was he rejected because it was like the law at the time?
No, it said unjustly in one of the hymns. That he was unjustly reproached.
Okay.
Yes, it was the wrong way of thinking of the people, that those who are childless are cursed by God. Yeah. So, yeah, that was not God's will. So this is an image, just an artist's rendering of what the old city, or what Jerusalem would have looked like in the time of Jesus. And there's the Temple Mount that was built up by Herod, the king, for the temple to be on. And right at that arrow, that's where the home of Joachim and Anna is to this day. Right by this gate that goes into the Garden of Gethsemane, which is down here in the Kidron Valley. And then that's the Mount of Olives on the other side. So you see where the wall is here. This is where the wall was, and this is outside the wall. This is where Christ was crucified. Or I'm sorry, it might be over here. So if we go to the next image, this is what Jerusalem looks like today. Roughly the same perspective, except it's lower down so you can see the Mount of Olives. There's where the Temple Mount is to this day, which is now a mosque and the Dome of the Rock. And then, so the ancient wall would have cut somewhere along here and included this area here where the citadel, where the king was. And then right here is today the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is the site of his crucifixion and burial, Christ's crucifixion and burial. But that's the same gate that was there then. You notice also that the Temple Mount is not a mount anymore. I wondered about this because when you walk in the old city in Jerusalem, in some places you're walking downhill to get to the Temple Mount. And if you looked at this image, oops, it's a big tall mountain. That's what happens in the ancient cities, is they get destroyed and people rebuild again and again and again. There are places where you would look down, our guide said, look down there, and you'd look down about 40 feet, and he said, that's the actual road in the Byzantine times. Now we're on the road here. So everything as it gets destroyed and rebuilt lifts up, and so all of the city has continued to rise, whereas the Temple Mount has not been rebuilt. Okay, so that's where their house is. To this day, there's a monastery there that one can visit. And this is the Lord's day. O people, be filled with gladness. Behold, the bridal chamber of the light and the book of the word of life has come forth from the womb. Listen to that imagery. It's talking about the Theotokos is the bridal chamber of light, and she's the book of the word of life. He is the word. She's the book containing the word. The temple gate that faces east has been born. This is the temple gate that's never to be opened. And she awaits the entry of the great high priest. She alone introduces only Christ to the world for the salvation of our souls. And this is the icon of the nativity of the Theotokos. So there's St. Anna there. And there is the infant Theotokos being washed. Okay, we'll go quickly through this. So this is the actual location inside the house of Joachim and Anna where Panagia was born. And then Another from the Nativity, today God who rests upon the spiritual thrones has made ready himself a holy throne upon the earth. He who made firm the heavens is in his wisdom has prepared a living heaven in his love for man. For from a barren root he has made a life-giving branch sprung up for us, even his mother, God of wonders and hope of the hopeless. Glory be to you, O Lord. And so there they are with their child, which, as we know also from the feast days of the church, they had her until she was 3, at which time they offered her to the temple, to live in the temple. What happened during those first 3 years? Here's an icon from their home. Oops. The icon is called the First Steps of the Theotokos. It's St. Anna teaching Panagia to walk. So she's a little toddler there. Okay, a final question before we run out of time. There was a hand up back here. Yeah.
I was going to ask you to elaborate on the temple that faces east.
The gate.
The gate.
Yeah, the gate. I don't remember. Someone can help me in the Old Testament where this is in Isaiah. It talks about the gate that shall not be opened, or Jeremiah. I don't remember, but that gate, because it's never to be opened until the Messiah comes, and that gate still exists, by the way. It's maybe we can show it. I'll go back a little bit. It never is opened, and so that is symbolic of the Theotokos, because she's ever virgin. The gate is never opened. Does that make sense? So that's why that's an image for her.
Just we're going to try something a little bit different and see if this is easier. That the teachers are wrapping up now, and they're just going to actually walk the students the whole way over here.
Okay.
Instead.
We like
So maybe
that.
that's maximize the very last
Yes,
minute.
there
But
we
once they show
go.
up, you gotta get them.
Okay. Yeah, I'll remember that. Okay, was there one last? Or Dawn?
Yeah, well, let me explain. This is a new Leon Newman person trying to get guidance on how to digest, consume, make use of Orthodox stories. So because the story gave that he had a rationale for not talking to his wife before he went off, I'm still trying to figure out how to, so it's like, okay, he had a rationale. Now, are we saying because it's been put in the story the church believes God is saying this is good and this is prescriptive for how we live with that?
No, I wouldn't extend that.
Okay.
Don't worry, what is he thinking? Malachi, do you have a question? Okay. Thank you, everyone. Let's rise for prayer. Christ our God, we thank you for the fullness of your humanity, in which you took on the humanity from these righteous people, these righteous ancestors. And we thank you for your saving acts upon the earth, which have brought about our salvation. For you are holy always, now and forever, into the ages of ages. Amen.